Good evening. I will call the special city council meeting to order for June 12th, 2017. It is 5 p.m. Fran, would you take the roll call, please?
Certainly. Strobush.
Here.
Raymond Schneider.
Here.
Paulson.
Here.
Erickson.
Yes.
Vicker.
Yes.
Davis.
Here.
And Van Blaricum.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And Fran, would you please introduce our very special person?
Certainly. This afternoon we have with us Patrick Ibarra, who is the co-founder and partner of the Mejorando Group. The city spent 2 days in workshops with Patrick out at Camp Wapagasset to further develop our organizational skills, identify needs. Patrick is the co-founder of the group and has an employment history of being, in addition to his consulting firm, being a city manager in Port Angeles, Washington, Mason, Ohio, Assistant City Manager and Human Resource Director, Emporia, Kansas, as a Management Assistant, and the City of Phoenix, Arizona, as a Management Assistant. He holds a Master of Human Resources and Organizational Development from the University of San Francisco, and a Master's of Public Administration degree from Arizona State University, as well as his undergrad degrees. Patrick has been published over 23 times in various professional organization manuals and magazines. And in addition, last year alone, he gave 14 professional conference presentations, including at the Wisconsin City-County Management Association. And he's on docket and scheduled in 2017 to do a number of them as well. So with that introduction, I just want to welcome Patrick here, and I'll turn it over to him.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, and I appreciate so much you scheduling this special meeting to review this organizational assessment. In front of you, you have two documents. One is the report, and the second is the PowerPoint. David's going to work with me here to present the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint's really the highlights. You recall this goes back to January when the city issued an RFP for an organizational assessment that included the facilitation of workshops. So when we were together on June 1st with you all and June 2nd with the executive team, I actually had a chance to share with you some of the highlights of what would be in the report. So what you really see in the report right now is sort of the documentation of what we covered. And I also incorporated into the report some of those aspects that we were able to address at that workshop that we had. What I want to do tonight is share with you a little bit more information than we had at the workshop. Really what I see is the opportunities going forward. Mejorando is Spanish. It means getting better all the time. So that's really my purpose as a consultant to local governments, is to try to leave the place better than I found it. And that's what we want to try to focus on tonight. So I'm going to walk through this and obviously be glad to answer any questions. As you have them, please feel free to ask me as we go through this. So second slide, please. Just a little bit more about my firm. We started in 2002. As was mentioned in my bio, I'm a former city manager and spent 15 years in local government. I'm a sole proprietor. I assemble talent around projects based outside of Phoenix. We have clients all over the nation. Have done a little bit of work in Wisconsin, including Little Chute, Wisconsin. We were here a couple years ago. We have clients all over. We do this type of work on a regular basis, again, exclusively with cities and counties all around the nation. So that's just a little bit about our firm. Next slide, please. What I wanted to, and I shared this in the report, you know, it's really important, I think, in today's world, with so much emphasis and attention being placed on local government, to sort of go back and reset. What's the focus and what's the future of local government? So we didn't discuss that a whole lot at the workshop, but I thought for the report, it provides really good context. And this is based on, and what we're finding, and I think we've known this, is that really no community, large or small, urban or rural, is really exempt from the forces that are being placed on local government around the nation for a variety of reasons. What I wanted to share, and I included in the report more information around this for when you get a chance to read that, just to kind of set the table. I think there's sometimes people in smaller communities think, well, those things won't impact us, but the fact is local government is shifting all the time, all around the nation, and often in ways that are not necessarily self-imposed. It's about people's expectations. You may recall we did spend some time on that, just looking at the headwinds of change and how what you're seeing, what you're feeling around the community about people's expectations. And what I share with you, and I'm going to go clockwise here, this is just based on some research I've come across in the last several years about the future of local government, and then what's that doing in regards to its role as a service provider. In regards to its role as a quality of life sort of provider as well. So I'm going to go clockwise here. The increased demands, as you all know, citizen expectations continue to increase. People sort of want more with do more with less, that whole notion. I doubt we ever go back to where people will decrease their expectations. So there's an increase in demands being placed on this organization in a way that pushes it in directions that it may not be totally ready for. The second component is mandates without money. You may recall we discussed that at the workshop. Federal government mandates, state government sort of do that whole notion, put more emphasis on local government, put more requirements, regulations, stipulations, legislative mandates on you without necessarily attaching funds to help you address those or comply with those standards. That's just going to continue. The static structures, as we know about organizations, local government in particular, it's a very functional organization. It doesn't tend to respond to change very well. It's not really meant to in some respects, but that can be also one of its limitations, is that it's so static, it's not being responsive. Please keep that in mind, because that's one of the areas that I saw in particular that this organization has been challenged by in the past. From the vantage point of the political side of this organization, it's not been as responsive. Therefore, you had an opportunity to get more involved in making sure that it was responsive. So I'll come back to that. But again, I see this frequently in organizations. If it's not responding in a way that's addressing community needs, it really creates it increases the temperature to where you're going to address those needs by one way, shape, or form. So we'll come back to that as part of the context for this organization. Rapidly changing technology, sort of what time is it, and people's expectations, both in the delivery of service as well as how they interact with local government. As we all know, that's just going to continue in some respects at breakneck speed. The next component, the out-of-whack tax system, just whether it's property tax or sales tax, how you're funding, just all that notion about the tax structure, your revenue portfolio, and the pressures from national, state, and local stressors that place burdens on how you're going to finance local government. And how is that going to work? So again, we're not trying to fix these trends. We're simply trying to identify this. And I'll share with you in the next slide really what's based on research, as well as how the organization can just be mindful of the future. As we know, historically, government can be overly reactive. This is about being proactive as well as being responsive. And the final component is just citizen mistrust. People's mistrust of institutions in general. Government sort of is in the eye of that, but people just not taking things on face value, wanting validation, the whole idea of transparency. I think that's where that came from. People wanting to know more about the interactions, the deliberations, sort of the return on their tax dollar. We're just going to see an increase, that along with citizen activism around the nation. So these are just 6 trends I wanted to share with you, putting pressure on local governments nationwide, and in some way, shape, or form, putting pressure on you all here in AMERY about how to address these. The next slide focuses on how governments are trying to respond to this. Pardon me, not all of these apply to the city of Amory. I think some do in particular. But again, I want to share with you, this is part of a larger platform about how local governments across the nation are trying to stay relevant in their role as being a qualified, capable, credible community builder. You may recall we explored that about how do you remain a credible community builder. And government sometimes is challenged by that. It's not always financial, but there's different dimensions, and I want to walk through this, going from left to right. A lot of local governments, especially during the recession and post, there's much more of a focus on the core services. It's easy in local government to drift away from your core mission, try to be all things to all people. And so what a lot of local governments are trying to do, something I think this organization is trying to get in front of, is what is it business that are you in, and how do you do what you're supposed to do and do it well, as opposed to trying to continually, that tug of war that people push and pull about your role as a community builder. So going left to right, demonstrating value. People volunteer to live in Amory. You volunteer to serve. People volunteer to work in the organization. Going back to the volunteer of the value, what's the value of living in the city of Amory? And I don't mean economic value like your property, your house, or your business, but what's the value of the city being a quality of life provider? What are people enjoying? Again, across the street we have the community band. That's one of the dimensions, one of the wonderful textures that you have in this community. What's the value? And I think that's where local government is trying to better understand how it can reinforce that value about what it means to be a resident in this community, as opposed to what's the cost of government, really what's the value of government. And I'm not saying that the government has an influence over the community band across the street. I don't mean it that way. I just mean as you all explore options about where you're going to invest the tax dollars, what you're going to choose to do. You may recall that at the workshop we had on June 1st, you spent a fair amount of time talking about creating this community as a stronger destination for tourists, about branding, about marketing. That gets back to that sort of addresses that notion, what's the value here, not just what's the cost. Integration of technology into service delivery, you all see that sort of front and center. I'll come back to that topic as well. I see that as a real opportunity to optimize your resources. Going back to sort of paper, pencil, manual processes is really a relic of the past. How do you continually transition and satisfy citizen expectations? People want to do more and more online, more and more on their phone, and how does that impact the organization's ability to deliver that and meet those expectations? The second row, kind of that constantly morphing, ever-learning employees. With an organization this size, you have highly versatile, capable employees. This whole idea about expanding their capabilities through both their technical skill development as well as their people skill development, that's mission critical to this organization. You expect a lot from the employees, both sort of zigzagging from the micro issue, addressing a community issue, to the macro issue, which is where's our department going and how do we sort of prepare ourselves for that. What a key ingredient there is, and we've all seen this, and this is sort of a small thing, but training is usually one of the first things that gets sort of modified when budgets get tight. And I would offer to you that that's really, and this sounds really simple, but even to change the word training in your budget to replace it with the word learning, because learning is an investment, and you really are trying to expect more from your workforce without necessarily expanding the head count, the total number of employees. You expect more out of that. How are they going to be able to do that with the skills they have? So it's that whole idea of that lifelong learning, if you will, in short, but continually investing in the workforce, especially an organization this size where the expectations are very high, that people can go sort of a mile wide and an inch deep, as well as an inch wide and a mile deep, sort of in a moment's notice, toggling back and forth very quickly. The whole idea of shared services, exploring that, you're doing some of that now, but partnering with nonprofits, partnering with the county, partnering with the state, just that whole idea that it's our citizens are expecting services. We don't always have to, we being the city of Amery, don't always have to be in the front seat. Somewhere you're in the car, maybe you're in the passenger seat, maybe you're in the back seat, where usually the people that know how to drive usually sit, but somewhere you're in the car trying to help influence addressing public policy. It's just not you, though, being the primary provider, but how you're partnering with other jurisdictions to ensure those needs are met by the community. Again, we're just going to see an increase in that, where your role really expands without necessarily you being the sole provider of doing that. Non-government solutions addresses that as well. You've got nonprofits in this community. How are they addressing some of those social issues that you see that is a need where the city may not necessarily be the primary deliverer of that? So again, that idea, you have community issues, how are you assembling, how are you influencing that those needs are addressed without necessarily the city being the one that's delivering it? And the bottom row, something you discussed quite at length at the workshop on June 1st was authentic civic engagement. And there's a difference between citizen participation and civic engagement. How are you actively enlisting the participation of your residents in not only the operation of city government, but what their needs are, and how are you communicating back to them and with them what they're not only receiving as a return on their tax dollar, but the value they have? How can they help you set public policy? How can they be a more active participant? You may recall we had this discussion at the workshop, what your expectations were of the community. It was about being involved, be informed, participate. Again, that's what we're going to see more and more, not just social media wise, but this whole idea of to have civic engagement, especially now when there's people that are struggling with what's the role of local government, to do that constant, sort of continuous and conscious community outreach for your members of your community. And then the final one, just the changes in the workforce, the demographics. As we know, the demographics of society are changing. You know, there's 77 million boomers and 51 million Xers and 76 million millennials, and just the whole notion of the workforce is changing. The composition of many nonprofits are changing, boards and commissions are changing, elected bodies are changing. So the changes in the workforce, the changes in our society does affect sort of people's expectations, people's roles as we see that, how that evolves, being conscious of this. So I share this with you just to set the table to help you kind of enlarge your understanding, if you will, about not only the trends impacting local government and how some of these might be impacting the city of Amery and your community, but also how to help yourself get out in front of this as a governing body to address those issues. And I embedded some of these actually in some of the recommendations, as you'll see. So going forward here on the next slide, the areas of assessment. These were spelled out both in the RFP and then my response to the RFP. Remember, this was not a department review, it was really an organizational review. So I didn't spend time meeting with department directors and isolating their operation to give you a recommendation. It was more of an organizational assessment. And the primary focus was on the form of government, the council administrator. So going clockwise here, the governance, the form of government. I'll come back to this with what my observations were. The highlights, again, there's more in the report, but I wanted to share the highlights with you. Going clockwise, the strategy, I'll address that. The structure, which really was not part of this assessment, and with this organization being so flat and, as I mentioned earlier, highly versatile employees having to work and toggle back and forth, that was really not a focus of this, but I do offer recommendations just about the structure. The service levels, both the mix and the composition of services, as well as the delivery of those services. How are you optimizing those? How are you being responsive to shifting needs in the community to address as the services evolve? Governments do a lot of things well. One of the things not do well is stop doing things. So how do you sort of be mindful to say which services maybe, and I can't call these out, but which services you need to revisit and say how can you revise the delivery of that service if you even want to continue that. And then at the same time, what services do you think you want to look forward in the future that the community is expecting from you to meet their needs? And will it always be the city or someone else? Fiscal budget, just the whole notion, not so much a review of the budget document itself, I mean the budget, your standing and financial status, but more the process and how you're handling the fiscal budgetary aspects you have. And then the final one, management processes and workplace culture. So those were the components that I identified and that I evaluated, but through interviews. I spoke with all of you in advance. I spoke with the department directors. I reviewed a number of documents that Fran and David had shared with me. We also processed this some at the workshops, both with you and the executive team. As we examined this, I shared with you some of my preliminary findings. And then what I found beneficial, and I hope that you did too, and I think you did, was we were able to work through some of those. So transitioning from the what, so what, to the now what. That's usually where these types of studies can hit a roadblock, is the now what, is the implementation. Nothing really changes, so to speak, in here. It's really what you identify to move forward as a result of the conversation you're having about this. So let me move on to the next slide, slide 6. These are the current practices. What I saw was, and again, we discussed this at length at the session on June 1st, was due to a number of factors, council members have been actively involved in directing city staff. And that was what I noticed in the conversations with you ahead of time and as well as the workshop. And that gets back to the whole idea about requiring a responsive organizational structure. Citizens' needs are going to get met. You're going to ensure that to be responsive in a timely, accurate manner. It seemed as though that's not happening for a variety of reasons. Now many of you are involved more than you care to be in directing and guiding that. That approach, while can work in the near term, obviously it won't work in the long term as a new city administrator comes on. Trying to revise that and refresh everyone's awareness about your role. But that's happened. It's where you are today. I'm going to offer recommendations about how to sort of move away, transition away from that, but to what? Without you losing a sense of comfort to make sure that your needs are met. And I know that can be sort of a dichotomy for some. I think it's more of a duality. It means that you can do both, sort of step back and delegate those responsibilities at the same time, ensure that your needs, really the community's needs, are being met in a timely, accurate way. But that was the first, and that was really the primary focus of the study was how's the form of government working? And there were a lot of thoughts, a lot of opinions, a lot of observations, a lot of insights about this is how it's working now. What can be done to improve that without, again, people losing the whole notion that it's going to go back to the way it was, if you will. How do you continually improve that? Second one is there's no strategic plan to guide the future. And strategic planning, again, think of that as a verb, not a noun. It's not about creating this wonderful four-color piece that gathers dust on the shelf. It's really about where's this community going? What are those headwinds? We explored a little bit of that, you may recall, at the workshop. Did a little bit of strategic thinking. And really the value of a strategic plan is it guides decision-making. It helps you identify what are those needs. And you'll see some overlap here when there's no strategic plan. And then number 3, there's a flat organizational structure. Again, that's the nature of an organization this size. That was not a heavy emphasis of my evaluation. As I mentioned, you have highly versatile people toggling back and forth between doing micro things and macro things in a moment's notice. But number 4, what I noticed as a trend, as a recurring trend of my evaluation, was there seemed to be a lack of strong management foundations about how the organization can function. The strategic plan is one of those indicators. Number 4 was delivering department services effectively. People are very capable, very qualified, trying to do, and very committed and very passionate about what they do here in the city of Amory. I was very impressed with the caliber of the department directors and members of their staff that I spent time with on June 2nd, trying to really operationalize the recommendations. That's what I offered to them that we tried to do in our workshop and that I was going to share in this assessment. But it didn't seem there was a common foundation organization-wide about what business that you're in and how you're trying to address community needs. People very well intentioned, trying to do it, but it seemed as though there were some things lacking. Not only a lack of a foundation, but number 5, there's no priority setting. Again, when you look at the budget, it's a series of spreadsheets. There's no goals or services attached to that. What are really the priorities of the community? You could sort of interpret it. And remembering the budget document is really not for you. It's really for the public. So if they were to read it, and it can be a page turner, it's a great story. I'm waiting for the movie to come. I mean, it's one of those. But when you look at it and it's spreadsheets, it's very hard to get a sense of what are the priorities of this organization. I could look at it, and I did, to see, okay, where are you spending the most money? Okay, I can sort of interpret that's the highest priority. But remembering that the budget is a policy document, it's also a priority setting document. And when there's not narrative there and there's a lack of focus and the organization is sort of evolving and adapting, trying to address changes, how do you stay unified as a governing body, and how does the staff stay focused about what they're trying to accomplish as an organization? That seems to be lacking, and so people drift. We're very well intentioned, but I'm not sure that that's replicable, depending on sort of the day of the week. Trying to be mindful of that. Many departments are producing reports, providing those to you in your packet about service levels. But again, there seems to be opportunity to punch those up and link that to what priorities are and how are you trying to accomplish what you're trying to do. I know that people would say, well, it's common sense, and my observation is if common sense was common, more people would have it. It is not common, and every organization is different. So what are the priorities of this organization? And the challenge is, as with all governing bodies, there are 7 sets of priorities. Among all of you, what's the common set of priorities? How does this group stay unified and focused? That's where strategic planning can really be beneficial. Setting those priorities. And some of them are static, meaning that they're continuing from year in and year out, but what is it about which ones should change, and how do you address those? And the final one, the final 2, the budget document, as I said, does not include goals or services. I tend to be a big believer, maybe it's a little bit old-fashioned, but goals are performance magnets. They drive behavior. When there's a lack of goals, and there's the lack of goals, there's not priorities, there's not the strategic planning process. Then my observation as a third party is to try to identify, to say, when those pieces are missing, people, again, well-intentioned, but what are you accomplishing? How well are you sort of satisfying the public's expectations? And then really for department directors, they're sort of closing on that breach, trying to sort of think for you, trying to think for the community. It puts them in that spot, trying to operationalize what the priorities based on the professionalism and experience and credentials. That's a tough spot sometimes to be in as a director, guessing what the public needs over the longer term. Again, it can function well in the near term. I'm not even sure it works well in the short term, because that's where they can get out of their lane. You may recall that discussion we had at the workshop. What's the lane of the mayor? What's the lane of the council? What's the lane of the city administrator? What's the lane of the city staff? And then what's the lane of the community? Making sure those lanes are clear and compelling for everybody helps you be successful on purpose. When the lanes aren't clear, people guess. That's not always a good thing, because that's where I think confusion can surface. And then all of a sudden, that's not healthy, nor is it healthy both near-term or short-term to maintain good relationships and a shared understanding. And then the final one was the workplace atmosphere. It seems as though the organization seems to be lacking some of the foundational policies and procedures to govern and create uniformity around how the organization is trying to function. Organizations sometimes this size become a little bit too comfortable, a little bit too familiar, and that doesn't always breed good things. I mean, you're running a multi-million-dollar enterprise here, and while people in the organization and you all, there's that strong familiarity. That's one of the beautiful things about communities this size. You have to be careful, I think, and be vigilant to make sure, and you may recall having that discussion at the workshop, that one of the aspects you're looking for the new city administrator, one of the many, is to make sure that that person is sort of the symbol of creating a healthy workplace culture. They should be sort of emblematic of your expectations about behavior, and trying to make sure that they're complying with that, and they're also setting the table for all the other employees. You have to be careful of that casual atmosphere in the workplace, because people can sort of flirt with the policies. And again, people think, well, no one would do anything about that issue in the organization. And this was not a compliance audit, and I'm not here to sort of offer that or to even lead you to that. But just being mindful to say this is an organization that you're trying to be responsible, consistent with community expectations, whether it's about how people dress, how people interact with citizens over the phone, out in the field, or over the counter, but what are the employees' expectations, and how are those being complied with on a regular basis without seeming stodgy and overly strict, At the same time, the other end of that spectrum is people getting too comfortable. And my observation is sometimes comfort breeds complacency, and that's not always a good thing. So trying to find that sweet spot, that Goldilocks moment about your workplace where there is a consistency. Policies and procedures, again, they can do that. I'm not an overzealous about that, because the key there is, do people comply with them? So simply adopting them is easy, but how are you making sure employees comply with those, as well as all of you? So those are the current practices. Again, there's more detail in the report. And then moving on, and again, I'll be glad to answer these questions. On the next slide, this is information that you may recall during the session at the workshop I shared with you. What are the strategies for creating a more collaborative, strategic governing body? You may recall that discussion. I went through these. We had a brief discussion about that. The highlights of those are in this. More detail is definitely in your report about those. What I saw as an opportunity, especially based on our discussions that we had at the workshop, it seems as though the organization would benefit from having a sort of a framework for what it means to be a governing body member. How do governing bodies, whether they're large or small, function well together? I mean, you're like a band, and every band has its share of hiccups and hits. And when you join a band, you have to figure out sort of where your drum solo is going to be. So how do you transition from campaigning? I'm not trying to be silly. I'm just offering that as an analogy. And I see this all the time in the work that I do with elected officials, trying to help them operate from a principle of trust, of a shared understanding, that you have a shared commitment. You're all here for the right reasons. And so what I share on that slide was just some information, maybe good reminders, a good refresh. I encourage you, beyond reading the entire report, spend a little time on that. I think it will just, and it's not my word, so to speak. It's information I've assembled over years as a consultant that I've seen in different cities and seen in different state municipal leagues, how they put information together to help governing bodies sort of operate effectively. So just going through these, and I'll just move through these and then get on the recommendations. Starting at the top, going clockwise, that you all have a shared constituency. Not only here, but you have in common with other jurisdictions, whether it's the county, the school board, other jurisdictions you're interacting with, but recognizing no one's operating in a silo here. Citizens don't live their life in a vacuum, so you all have a shared constituency. They're a resident of the country, they're a citizen of the state, they're a citizen of the county, they're a citizen of the city, and you're trying to work with those other jurisdictions, and again, trying to find that sweet spot of how you integrate and incorporate those expectations and addressing those community's needs. Teamwork, something we covered at the workshop. What does it mean to be a team member here? And I know that sounds a little bit corny. I think it's important to remind everyone of that, what it means to be a team member, how you cooperate and how you share your understanding, your points of view is crucial, especially in the public's eye. They look to you to be that symbol of being a credible, capable, qualified governing body that represents them in all different dimensions. Define your roles and relationships. We've spent a fair amount of time on that at the workshop, just remembering what your role is as a member of the governing body. You all talked about being prepared, doing your homework, doing some of those basic things about what it means to be effective here. That there's a lot that goes on outside of these meetings that in order for you to make better decisions, you've got to walk in prepared, well-informed, solicit people's point of view, and then obviously process that and determine what you think is the best decision for the community. Honor council staff partnership. That seems to be an area, again, as we looked at the workshop, that needs to be refreshed about those lanes, because it's sort of a mixing of that. That's not going to be sustainable in the short term. As you look at the new city administrator, I know that's going to be, from him or her, that's going to be an area they really want to focus on. Where do those lanes separate? Where do they intersect? But honoring that partnership, relying on that judgment and decision-making authority of the city administrator to meet your needs, clarifying those expectations up front, having a good evaluation system, a good communication, just making sure those basics are in place to where your needs are being met. But honoring that and letting the process work without feeling as though you're stepping away from it. It's really not stepping away. It's you have a mechanism here. How do you make sure that mechanism is going to work well, not only for you, but for the residents of this community? Moving forward, allocating that time and energy, as I mentioned. Clear rules, we talked a little bit of that. I shared with you some governance manuals from some other cities, just as a sample to say what are the protocols, what are the rules. I encourage you to review those when you get a chance. Those were handed out at the workshop. And again, those look really kind of intimidating when you look at them. And one of those cities was a client of mine. I know they had to work through it. It's really trying to identify how are you going to govern? And what are the expectations? It's really the documentation and clarification. I think we started to scratch the surface of that. I'm confident we did that at the workshop. My sense is there's still work to be done as the new administrator gets on. Again, clarifying roles and expectations. That's just crucial. And you're never done with that. Expectations continually ebb and flow, so just trying to make sure of those. Continuous learning, participating, whether it's the National League of Cities or the State Municipal League, but trying to share your understanding, increase your understanding with your colleagues from cities around the state. Participating, whether it's a webinar, it's a program, that the league conference. Again, rubbing elbows, you get a chance to brag on AMERY, and that's always fun to do. But also learn from presenters or learn from materials that what other communities in the state are contending with, you are too, and how are they addressing those. And then communication and problem solving. Obviously, that's a centerpiece of what you're doing. Your decision makers, how are you trying to address the problems? How are you kind of trying to communicate those both internally, from staff to you, from you to staff, as well from you to the community. So there's more information about these in the report. I put in the middle of that the whole idea of civility. And these were not intended to sort of even brush up against the notion about what's not happening here. These were just simple reminders of this. And you as a governing body, I found you a delight to work with. I thought we had very good discussions at that workshop. People seemed to be engaged in the conversations. But just remembering that you're working in the public eye, and that whole notion of civility, as I say in the work that I do with councils, I can't tell a whole lot about you by how you agree, but I can tell a whole lot about you by how you handle disagreement. And you all know that can put a strain on relationships, and it can impair your trust. I think especially in today's age, it's really important to remember that you all have a common purpose and a shared understanding and a love of this community. It's how do you reconcile those differences and points of view, especially in the public eye at council meetings. So again, good reminders, good information, I think, in your report, just as a framework for what it means to be an effective governing body. And then the last slide are the recommendations. The first one, and going in order here from the assessment, clarity about expectations, roles, and relationships with the new city administrator. I found our conversation at the workshop with you as well as with the executive team, we really tried to identify some of the mechanics, how to make sure that relationship works well, even suggesting what kinds of questions you could be asking candidates to make sure that you're clear about your expectations and trying to find out from that person their background and their experience, how they've addressed issues before. The better you know up front and the more likely it is you're going to have a shared understanding, the more the chances are the relationship's going to work well. It never unravels because of one thing. It's usually a blending of things or things that weren't being paid attention to or communication stalls, a variety of things. I'm not rehashing all of that. But going forward, trying to use that as a lesson learned, what's the silver lining, if any, there. Definitely trying to get clear about those expectations, roles, and responsibilities. And being specific, your needs, obviously there are 7 sets of needs and then there's 1 set of needs. So how does that person successfully respond to your issues individually and then all of you collectively? That seemed to be an issue that was not happening in a timely way in the past. My observation and from conversations with you, that was a primary reason that you've gotten involved with sort of directing staff. Many of you mentioned that you want to sort of pull back from that. How do you pull back without losing that sense of control? It works in a lot of communities. It's really trying to make sure that you have a trusting partnership with that new city administrator, and that's reciprocal. That's not just one way from him to you. That also has to be from you to that person, you to him or her. The second one is undertake strategic planning. I think shortly after the new city administrator joins the organization, definitely pursue that. There's a lot that comes out of that process, really kind of clears out the cobwebs and cleans out the cupboards about what's going on in the community. And it's not so much about the document and look how long the list is. It really allows you to think strategically about where the community is going and how you can get in front. And I think you have some of those dimensions. You know, in 2007, you updated your land use comp plan. It's going to need to be updated. But that comp plan really only addresses certain segments, and some of that needs to be refreshed. Things have changed in the community. Not only that, but the community itself and their expectations of the city as a service provider has changed as well. So no one plan is the sort of the silver bullet, but I definitely encourage you to undertake some strategic planning after that new city administrator is sort of, after he or she has gotten their feet on the ground, if you will. And I think they're going to probably recommend that, just because that conversation clears out all that and really identifies where's this community going, vision, mission, values, goals and objectives, and how you're going to get in there. And I see that as the backstop to many of these other, the backdrop to many of these other aspects. Number 3, to increase the investment in professional development organizations for the directors and their staff. As I mentioned, you know, you're expecting, the community is expecting them to toggle back and forth on their skill development, on their execution of those services. They're highly capable, trying to do the best. At the same time, technology changes, equipment changes, people's expectations change. How are you making sure that your employees are well prepared to address not only policy issues or what they're hearing in their profession around the state, but also the skills to make sure that they feel well equipped to deal with these new challenges? So increasing that. The return on investment is a high return on investment. Somebody attends a conference or takes a workshop or attends a webinar, they immediately bring that information back and operationalize it and share it with the staff. I think that's happening now. I'm just reinforcing that that should be something you want to consider to expanding. Number 4, set annual goals. Again, I know this seems kind of fundamental. That's not happening. Annual goals meaning for departments, obviously in consultation with you. What are your goals for that next fiscal year? How does that drive the budget? Remembering the budget is a policy document. There should be some coordination between your expectations. You can see how strategic planning can help that, but also having annual goals to identify what business you're in, reminding the residents of this community what you're trying to accomplish. How does that help departments? Know what they're trying to accomplish each and every year. Some things stay the same, but then it's a matter of really what's changing and what is it that you want to change. And you may recall from the workshop, there was a strong appetite I found from our conversation that you want to see the organization move particularly in different directions. Not releasing what it's doing now, but the directions. Again, back to that branding, communicating, civic engagement, creating this community as a real destination. That's not going to happen without some effort being applied to think that through, figure it out, and work that and create some goals around that and expectations. And again, I'm a huge believer that goals are performance magnets, so they drive behavior. The absence of goals, people guess, and that's not, very credible in the minds of the residents about what you're trying to accomplish, that people have to guess. Again, oftentimes they'll guess right, but how are you being responsive to the community needs? That's where the goal setting process. The next one, number 5, pursue a creation of a 3 to 5 year technology master plan. Something that the department directors and I discussed at length was the role of technology. This was technology master plan internally. Typically, it's an annual thing for upgrades and updates and equipment and software, which creates sort of a short-term expectation. Let's buy it this year. Can we kick the can down the road? Just like your community investment plan, which is a multi-year capital investment. Fleet replacement is a multi-year replacement. That I encourage that. The technology has become not only more dominant, but it's also become more expensive in many ways. So trying to think through, there are firms that do this, I don't do it. They'll come and do a needs assessment of department directors, really work with them to say what's on the horizon about services, and then come back with recommendations and share that report with you to get beyond the annual, what are we spending next year for technology? And I know it used to be in the 90s where people thought as soon as you bought it, it was out of date. I think those days are way behind us. There's continuous upgrades. Many software vendors target local government. But as we all have seen, technology is becoming fully embedded in the delivery of services. And again, we had a lengthy discussion with the department directors. I'm sure many of those are shared with you. Just how do you stay current? How do you make sure that people are not wasting time trying to keep old systems updated? And at what point have they sort of had an expiration date on those systems? So trying to think, just like you've done for capital, like you're trying to do for fleet, is think as technology, because of not only the time, the money that's invested, but also the outcome of investing in that allows the staff to optimize their time and deliver services more efficiently. That's really what this gets back to. It's not just the whistles and bells of buying new technology. It's to ensure that staff is devoting their time in order to execute the responsibilities and to deliver services efficiently. That's the role of software and software systems and technology. Number 6, I know this is not real high profile, but the budget request form, I think this gets back to, and the department directors and I spent some time working through this, talking about this to say, I think the budget request form, again, helping them push through. My observation was if staff is needed to increase staff, I'm not sure how you would know that. Many organizations struggle. There's no silver bullet to say, it's an increase in population, or is it service calls, or is it, annexation or lane miles, or any of those. It's trying to make sure that budget request form is shedding light on what's the goals, what are the services, how that's connected to what the dollars are they are asking. I think that provides for all of you a much more robust and rich conversation as you go through the budget process. Because really the dollars of the budget process, it's easy to get lost in that. I think more importantly for you to have discussions around is what are you trying to accomplish, and that budget request form I think could be modified to where it provides you more information to have a more meaningful conversation. I think that information is there, so it's not about starting over, but it's trying to make it more effective for all of you to have a more meaningful, because I know it's easy to get lost in how much again and the line items, and really to me, my observation, that's secondary to the conversation you're having about priorities. But if the material's not there to have a conversation about the priorities, then I think you'll go to the dollars and cents, and then you're talking about dollars and cents, which really should be the result of the priorities. So again, I go back to the budget request process. Include those goals and services in the budget document. And then the final one is the new administrator, you were all very vocal about this, should reset the workplace culture. That person is the symbol, it's emblematic of the creating a healthy workplace culture is about character, about principles, about leadership. How can those principles be contagious? And again, they're not going to come in and have to fix things, so to speak. I definitely didn't pick that up. It's how do they come in and refine things, refresh things, revisit some of the assumptions, and make sure that they are the sort of the standard bearer of what you're expecting out of the entire organization, from the newest employee to the most senior employee, from the highest paid employee to the lowest paid employee. Just what's the culture about? How can they modify that? And I know, as most city administrators and as a former city manager myself, one of the first things they're going to do is go in and ask a lot of questions. They're going to spend time with directors. They're going to go out in the field. They're going to pore over documents. But they're probably going to learn by asking and learn by doing, and then come back to you with their assessment. I'm hoping that this assessment that I've completed for you not only helps you, but helps that administrator to know maybe where to dig a little bit more, where to ask some of those questions. It just helps them kind of get a sense of the organization from a third party, but they're definitely going to come in and kind of fill some of the holes and identify some areas for further examination. Overall, I think this organization has a lot of opportunity. There's challenges like every community, like every organization. I give you credit that you stopped, you took a breath, you decided how can we improve what we're doing and make a better use of our time, make better use of the public's investment in your time and their dollars. What I try to do is, and as I always do, take that very seriously, very earnestly, and provide back to you both some macro strategies as well as some very mechanical things. And that's what we worked through at the workshop, was both the lofty, as I say, leadership is about plumbing and poetry. So we tried to spend time on both, and that's what I tried to address in the report, that some of this is about the poetry, the loftier notions about what you're trying to build, the community and where it's going. And then there's the plumbing side, that you have to push your sleeves up and kind of get in and do the work and get back to doing the public's business in the way that you want to start doing that. So I'll be glad to answer any questions. I know I went through that fairly quickly, and this is your first blush, but I'd be glad to answer any questions.
There's a lot there to digest.
Yes. And the report backs up what I've shared, and when you get a chance to read through that, I think it will just provide that context and definition and description of both the assessment of the current practices and the recommendations, obviously. Try and provide that context.
Did you look at the current job description for an administrator?
No, I did not look at that.
Okay.
No.
I really like the idea of, for lack of a better term, merging that strategic plan, even though we don't have one to merge, but to insert that strategic planning component into the budget. Have you talked to Fran or David or somebody from the city on how to do technically doing that? Not necessarily what words to put in there, but how to create that document or how to implement that?
We've touched on that, but not very much in depth. And remembering too, and I have the good fortune of working with a lot of cities around strategic planning, and I always try to manage expectations that the first time out of the gate, it's like going to the gym. You're not going to be an Olympic athlete after you go to the gym one time, unfortunately. But you have to sort of gradually improve. But what I do recommend is that you use the strategic planning process prior to doing the budget, right? Over time, though, I mean your first exposure to doing strategic planning, let's say, it's sort of you're making spaghetti, right? You throw a lot of things up on the wall to see what sticks. Over time, you'll become more proficient at that and how that drives the budget, because the strategic plan, the outcome of all that, is to set focus,
right.
Is to set the goals. And many times the clients that I have, they'll do the strategic planning process at the advance, kind of like what we did, a little bit of that thinking, and then that drives the next step is, okay, how does that influence the budget requests from the department directors? That's sort of the mechanics of it. If you get them out of order, then you're sort of the cart before the horse. So doing the strategic planning process ahead of time, and I'm going to speculate with fairly certain here that whoever that new city administrator is going to be, he or she is going to want to do that. for a variety of reasons. Also remembering that the most important ingredient for you all with that new city administrator is have a shared understanding about priorities. And that strategic planning process starts to help flush that out, right? So it benefits the organization and the community, but also your partnership with that city administrator. And likely that person's going to request that for a variety of reasons. So, other questions I can answer or address?
Probably tomorrow.
Yes.
Stay close to your email.
Yes, if you have questions, please feel free to email me. I'll be glad to answer those, or give me a call, and I'll be glad to talk with you about that. I know you're hitting this for the first time. I do think the workshop helps put this in context, because now what I'm sharing with you is not first blush. The report itself is, but I thought those workshops were helpful in operationalizing what I was seeing, your thoughts, and sort of where do you go from here. And really set up for your process to select that new city administrator. Obviously, that's the linchpin to much of this.
So do we start the strategic plan now, tomorrow morning, or do we wait till the city administrator gets here?
I recommended in the report to wait till that person starts.
Okay.
In some respects, look at it this way. You've not done it to this point.
Right.
Some of this is that, well, I don't mean that like, okay, continue, but it has merit in itself. That you want to make sure that some of this is sequential, right? So like the budget process or the budget document. There's some of these that are less macro and they're more micro, and I think as you read and I tried to identify both of those. Strategic planning is a macro recommendation. That is a sort of a big undertaking, if you will. And I think that new city administrator, definitely I would encourage you, so if those candidates that might be watching this, I definitely think that that's a question you should ask candidates. Is what is their experience in helping governing bodies do strategic planning? And I think you're going to find most candidates have deep experience and expertise and will be able to speak to it firsthand.
Okay.
So again, feel free to reach out to me with your questions, and I'll respond in a timely way and offer my thoughts. But thank you so much for this opportunity. I hope you found this to be beneficial to help make the transition from where you were to where you want to go.
I did. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
So do we have you on speed dial? Okay. Item 4 is scheduling the July City Council meeting.
Yes, I put that on the agenda just to verify with council. In the past, when the 4th of July holiday has fallen that close to the city council meeting, sometimes the council wants to meet on the day after the holiday. There's been other times where they've wanted to postpone the meeting for a week and meet on the 12th. People sometimes are out of town or have vacations or something with that long weekend, so I just wanted to verify with all of you, what date do you want to meet in July?
Doesn't matter to me.
I'd like to postpone it a week. I think we've traditionally done that in case we want to take the extra 2 or 3 days.
So that would be July 12th.
12th. For the 12th.
Okay,
It's good for me.
Does that sound okay with everybody?
I believe it is.
Okay, we will note that then, that the July City Council, regular City Council meeting will be held July 12th rather than July 5th. Also, given that the date of the council meeting might be changing, I did also want to review some of the June and July committee meetings as well. We can hold both Public Works, Finance, and Parks Committee are going to have some very meaty agenda issues to them. We also have a special Finance Committee meeting scheduled for July 19th, which is the soonest we could get all of our stakeholders together for the development of our new industrial park road. That'll be the only thing on the agenda for that meeting. We are going to be having on July 27th our official border review from 10 until noon, and then that afternoon at 2 o'clock, Planning Commission will need to meet. We will have probably a rezoning and possibly several conditional use permits to review at that time. So we can meet the last week of June if you want to stay on that schedule. What we're going to be looking at then, Public Works, we have a request for a street closure, the next step in our walkability, also possibly a street abandonment. Finance Committee has several issues. The proposed hotel project, financial related issues are quite complex, and we'll be having a consultant here for that. Also parks, possibly also in addition with the hotel project, a possible property swap with Polk County is something. So I'd like to split not try to have all of these meetings back to back. Normally we would have parks and then finance or vice versa. It probably would be better because of what's on the agenda, maybe not to try to do all of that in one sitting, even though they're somewhat interrelated. So I was looking at, traditionally we have Public Works. It would be a 10 a.m. meeting on Tuesday the 27th.
It was
Oh,
9.
the 25th is Tuesday. Oh, I'm in
June.
July,
I'm sorry.
I'm in July,
Yeah,
sorry.
We're looking in June.
27th at 10?
June 27th, Public Works at 10.
Okay.
Then,
I thought it was a 9 a.m.
was that 9?
It was 9,
It was
yeah.
9? We can do 9. I thought it was 10.
Or 9.
I'll be ready at
I
9.
like 9.
I can be ready at 9. Then for parks, if we could split parks and have parks at 5
Tuesday?
on Tuesday the 27th. And then finance, do you want to shoot for that on Monday the 26th or Wednesday the 28th?
I would say Wednesday.
Wednesday the 28th.
And if you want to move it up earlier, I can do it. I can go earlier
Okay.
or later.
I have to check, because 2 of those days I'm teaching till 6 p.m. at Rice Lake, but I don't remember if it's the
Okay.
26th, 27th, or 27th, 28th. I
Okay,
have to
if you
check.
could get back to me about that, Chris, and then to the consultant, I have to work with their schedule as well.
Yes.
But
If they want to come in, if they want to come in the daytime, that I could.
yeah, they're
make that
pretty
work.
flexible. You know, I don't know if, you know, that would be better for you, Chris, what your schedule looks like.
It's just, there's 2 days, I just gotta double check. I know it's.
Okay,
that I
sure,
can
no
let
worries,
you know.
just let me know which days we're talking about. Okay, so tentatively then we have those meetings set up. Tuesday the 27th, Parks at 5, Public Works 9 a.m. In Finance, Wednesday the 28th, possibly earlier in the day if we can get that. Waiting to hear from Chris.
Yeah,
Okay,
good deal.
that's easier than sending out an email chain.
Got a captive audience here, that's why.
Yeah, I have all of you gathered here, so thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.